Hi, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. We are really excited to have a conversation today with Curator in Residence Kristen Hileman and banner artist Anna K.E, whose work Intangible Economies of Desire is on view right now at the Delaware Contemporary in our platform gallery outside of our building. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Brittany. Thanks for having us. Anna, welcome, and thank you for the amazing banners that you created for the Delaware Contemporary. The banners went on view in December of 2020 and will remain on view into May of 2021. And what we thought we'd do in this conversation is talk a bit about those banners, but also expand the discussion out to look at that imagery and that work in the larger context of your practice. So let's start first with the banner imagery, which sort of these amazing images of limbs, human limbs that don't quite look real. They look kind of technological. And on the building, they're realized at such a scale that it almost seems as if this metal clad facade of the Contemporary has limbs itself, arms or legs, and it's about to kind of lift itself up or reach out from the building and move in some kind of way. So the first question I have for you is, can you talk to us a little bit about this surreal or science fiction kind of quality of the imagery and how the human and the technological come together in this work?
And when I saw the building, it really immediately gave me this impulse that I needed to bring certain kind of like organic kind of like architecture into architecture. So, and also because it has all these lines, it reminded me of shutters. And the piece I did at Simone Subal's gallery was like all these body parts that were in a dialogue. They became like, it was a wall installation, but they became kind of like sculptural because I combined them with jalousie that were translucent, like out of glass. So it was all transparent, just like a double framing in a kind of weird way. And when I saw the building, it felt that it's also some type of jalousie system because there are all these lines, and it felt like I wanted to open up some of the parts, you know, like through hanging the banner in there. It feels that some of the parts of jalousie just like got lift up, and you have this view inside of this body all of a sudden. Like you just mentioned that the building gets this like legs and all this like wrists, and it will lift up or something. So it also like it plays with this idea of like opening the window and entering a different dimension somehow. And yes, the body parts are based on my own actually like joints like knees and elbows and wrists, and to build them in hyper realistic way in Blender, which is normally used for animation. And then you have like this light of beams pointing to certain kind of like direction, which is unknown because you have cropped image, so you don't even know where the light is beaming to. And then you understand maybe it beams and you're able to see all these objects that are surrounding the body because it's all like structured all together and they're all connected at the end. The gray background, which is, I have to mention, the gray background is kind of like important little detail because in a Blender you have infinite space. So it's actually like this infinite space that surrounds us that has no emotions or any kind of like structural thinking. Yeah, I was thinking also because inside of the building there is so much art happening. There are like different shows that are changing permanently, and our banner would have stayed there for like at least half a year. And I imagine it would be a beautiful experience for people to understand how we actually choreographically how we enter the museum and experience these suspended notions that are around us, all these like attempts, artistic attempts and interpretations, and little bit depicts like what is happening in a poetic way inside of museum.
Space is something that you mentioned in that response. And one reaction I have to what you said is how interesting it is to think to think conceptually about an institution that's dedicated to showing art as a kind of, you know, potentially an infinite space, potentially a space that could sort of put a lot of different kinds of objects and concepts and artist work forward to a public. But, you know, whether it's from the curatorial perspective or the institutional perspective, light is shown and sort of directs people to specific kinds of artwork. So artwork and ideas. So I appreciate kind of this interesting conceptual mapping of what's going on in your banner images with the functioning of the art institution. And I also, I mean, I'm really intrigued about sort of what you alluded to with the relationship of this banner work to that 2018 show at Simone Subal Gallery, Crossing Gibraltar at Midday, I think was the title of the show, which included similar imagery to what's on the Delaware Contemporary's building, but in a smaller format. And as you said, sort of built out to resemble kind of windows or blinds and sort of framed in an architectural way, but in a small format and within the interior of the gallery. And that work was also paired with some freestanding sculpture that was lit sculpture. And so the gallery also had a very architectural feel. And I think this is probably true too. I didn't get to see it in person, but your 2019 project at the Georgian Pavilion for the Venice Biennale also had the sense of engaging or creating a space for activity within a particular site. So all those observations kind of, I'll distill them down to you in the question of, like, how do you think about spaces in which people interact with one another, whether they be interior spaces or exterior spaces, like the one in Wilmington? Is this kind of an ongoing theme in your work? And how does it manifest in the different kind of media you bring and choices you make, formal choices you make as an artist?
Yes, I realized that Simone's space, what I worked on was to bring outside world inside in the gallery, because there were all these like light structures that were standing freely in the space. And these light structures, I don't know if, I mean, you must be aware that Simone's galleries in a Chinatown, and it's a famous area for light district. Like they have like every other store is a light shop, so you can buy all kind of lamps and all kind of like lightning system. And I felt like I brought this entire one of the stores I brought up in a gallery somehow. So you had like all this suspended structure of the light, and I was all the time comparing, because Jalousie was also creating very futuristic kind of bluish, coolish light. I installed LED lights inside of the Jalousie. So it was like all about this kind of like reflections and light system. And I was comparing with light architecture, because at one point sun is such a like a dominant creature in the world. When sun goes down, you understand there's so much light, electricity in the city, and it starts vibrating and everything gets like so vital, and like you understand that there are like all these like substructures that you can't see while the daily light. So I felt like that was one architecture. Then there were like sound pieces which I lowered the volume a lot, so you could only hear like whispering. So you would like walk, and they were like not hidden, but they were not obviously there. They were part of the metal structure that kept the light. So you would walk through the exhibition, and you would hear someone whispering, and you would like go lower, go to the little speaker, and you would hear this like strange mantric repetitive sounds. And
you should smell like a garlic. I'll love you even more. You should smell like a garlic, and I'll love you even more. Even more. Even more.
it was also something like I got inspired in New York when I moved here. It's the cities like a stage itself. Like every single person who is in the street is a performer. Like sometimes people start fighting, and I see in their eyes, they only look around if they have a watcher, someone, if someone is watching, like they sometimes make these fight scenes just to be watched. And I love this experience. And I always pick some strangest sentences, like when I walk by some people who are on a phone call and like having these loud conversations, or like it's another architecture of like very private kind of intimacy that unfolds in the city. So I'm always like picking words or sentences, and then I start like recording in my studio as a repetitive mantric kind of like sound. So that was like how, and then I brought jalousie, which is normally like, or windows basically, which is normally installed on outside of the building. And so when you entered, you had all this outside world inside of the gallery. So that was the flip somehow. With the biennial piece, it was pretty brutal decision, because I knew I had like one space on Arsenale as a part of the Georgian like pavilion, because they do not have any space on Giardini, and lucky enough they get offered on Arsenale, which is also part of the main event, to get a pavilion space there. And I knew it's going to be one room, and I wanted to create this kind of experience where actually like the viewer is in a passive condition and the entire object is an active body. Because normally kind of like I was reflecting the stage and the tribune situation. Like when you're on the stage, you're performing, and people on the tribune are in this kind of like a sitting, kind of like a passive condition, consuming the whole thing. And I built two tribunes. So there were like actual tribunes, and the tribunes were the stage performance, like the active kind of body parts. And the viewer, because it was so narrow around, it was like 1.20 m only to walk around. You could just like stand and like observe it as a kind of like I don't know, and just to it was like a wave coming towards you, and you were just like taken over emotionally. And there were like many things happening simultaneously. There were like 5 videos installed inside of piece, but in more like a hidden way. You had to like discover it, you had to stretch your neck and search for it. Or like then there were like these water fountains, like there were like 18 old, like the very first previous Georgian letters that spell the word deranged, English word actually deranged, translated into archaic Georgian letters. And they were like functioning as a water fountain. So it was all the time water cleansing the whole body of this dichotomy, because there were like 2 identical sculptures that were just standing next to each other, creating this pyramid, like white and black, exactly the same sculptures, also like inverted in color. So all this binarity and everything was clean, like there was this unified energy of water cleansing the whole system somehow. And I think there I acted opposite. Like I didn't want it the like viewer to become part of the choreography. I wanted to build the choreography and the viewer just to witness it. So yeah, it's always different. Like I really, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's just like I just like need the space to kind of like unfold the performance somehow. It's really interesting, and it's more and more became articulated somehow, like that's the way I work, more or less. Like I really enjoy making experiments in my studio, and I do a lot of little things and experimenting and drawing a lot, because drawing is kind of like initial thing how I started making art. So but installations and everything else, all the other praxis what I do is kind of like related to space.
So I think it's important to say here, for those who might not know, that your background is one of dance, and what that would suggest to me that you are sort of very attuned to sort of physical responses to stimuli, to the movement of one's body in space. And there's a couple questions I have here. One is, when you are thinking through and planning these sort of spatial and sensual experiences with your art, is it really is that experience sort of filtered and tested against your own body and your own physical experiences? Or are you imagining sort of the bodies of others moving throughout that space? So I guess this is a question about sort of the personal experience of the artist or the imagination that the artist brings to understanding others' experience of their work. And then the second question I have is, so it's your body on the banners. Delaware is very notably your body in the videos that you do. And sometimes those videos sort of expose your body. Is there how does that feel to you? I mean, it's a really simple question. It's like, but it's complex at the same time. I mean, do you feel exposed? Do you feel that you're performing? Do you sort of distance yourself from your own body when it becomes the subject of art? So if you could, I know that those are two kind of related but different questions.
I think at one point, like when I started to study art, I kind of like realized that there are no borders, like there is no my private life, or like there is no job I'm doing, and there is no studio I'm going to. It's all actually one. Like I started like radically bringing everything together, and it took me some time. Like I realized sometimes like things happen in your head, you realize, you reflect, analyze things, but really to live it and really to like become it, it takes a long journey. So once I realized, I started like pushing myself in that direction, like not to put any kind of limitations to my existence, to understand that each individual moment, like the situation right now here, to see myself in this situation and to see it as a performance, like, because we are like, for example, like I was just I can mention again biennial piece, because the title of the piece is Rare Mirror View, Simulation, 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 dot, dot, dot. And I feel like entire existence is a simulation, so it's kind of it can shift all the time, change all the time, and you're kind of like the core of it, of your own simulation. So I started seeing myself in studio as an kind of like independently, like my physiognomy as a piece of work. Like me building a sculpture was like, yes, the sculpture is happening, but the process of it and my body itself is another sculpture that is coexisting parallel. So I started like separating things and like understanding how precious that moment is, that independently is an art piece too. Like not my body is an artist, but the entire action is an art piece. So it's like, that's why the series, like the first, that was kind of like intuitive kind of like gesture, like the very first video which I filmed in 2010, I guess, or 11, just right after 2 months when I moved to New York and felt like entirely suspended in the city, not knowing anyone, not understanding where I am, what I'm doing, but it was my biggest wish to live in New York. So it was this kind of like very childish kind of vision I always had since I was 16, I guess. And I was in my studio and I had this impulse to kind of like act very real, like whoever I am, to kind of show it. And lucky enough, I had like shittiest camera in my studio, and I asked my boyfriend, hey, can you sit at my table and just film me, like film in a way that you're just like looking at me, like don't film me, just look at me. And this is when I did the first performance. And I don't call it performance, I call actually an action, because it was this kind of like, I had no clue what I was doing. It was just like this force of energy. I was like, I want to make art the way I make art, and I want to show it. And that's the video basically. I analyzed afterwards what was happening in the video, and it was very like interesting to me to kind of like understand why I had to act. Someone asked me like, why are you actually acting? Why you didn't ask some performer to act? Like, why your body? Why are you pulling the pants down? Like you can just ask someone, pay money, and like create a nice video piece. And it's important because like what I just mentioned about the entire process of like the happening, like that's part of it. It's happening. I have no control. It's not a performance that is planned or like kind of like mathematically thought through. It's just something that is very intuitive and just could happen in that moment, in that very moment. If it's not, if the camera is not there, it might happen, but it won't get documented. You know, like this is how like very often I do like very strange gestures in studio, and I really like, I don't care if I'm capturing it or not. It's just like there for the moment as a kind of a dadaistic kind of like gesture. And I think like body, this is how body became independent kind of tool. I don't know if you can call it tool, but body was always a tool when I was dancing, because all this choreography, the storyline, everything exists around all around you, and you are a tool kind of like bringing all this like vocabulary together and bringing into the geist of it, you know, like a kind of like a giving it a soul somehow. But that's a different type of tool, I feel, because to see yourself as a I don't know, to see yourself as a kind of experimental field, your body, yourself, your actions, makes things even more like weirder somehow. And I feel like this moment is very important. It only started here in New York, maybe because I felt so awkward in the city, because it was all like, it was all about studio. I never came to New York to be part of social life here. I actually came here to get inspired and be in studio and take out as much as possible. So this is how I was like living and working, and understanding that it's kind of like also off, because New York is based on this wildest social life, and like people's like they basically like the whole city vibrates through exchange with each other, creative exchange. And I was like total opposite of this. So I was like totally like suspended in my own reality, in my own realm. But this is how you reach out to different like territories which are unknown to you, because in this situation I understood that actually my actions are pretty unpredictable, and I should just like give it a try and give it a
maybe the one thing, I don't know if you want to just say a few words about it, is how are you imagining, or are you imagining the viewers' bodies?
in space.
You know,
No, actually I'm not like the thing is like I'm searching for a message. Like when I go in a space, I'm actually searching in this constellation of me being in the space and like reflecting the surrounding, is actually searching to accumulate some kind of knowledge and like to find certain kind of message that will unfold. And once it starts unfolding, choreography happens. So I'm actually searching for some kind of essence of like information. It's strange. Like I never think about visitors, like never, like it never occurs, but it happens. It always, like my first show I did in New York, it was funny. It was at Simone's Gallery. It was in 2011, I guess. And before, I never mentioned my dance career that I was having in Georgia, or like later on also in Germany, in Stuttgart. I kind of cut off this part of my life because I needed to do it to make some sacrifices for my own kind of like for art, basically. And it was a painful process. So when I did it, I made the decision not to talk about it anymore. So I did my first show in US, and I guess because the culture here is so refined about all this interdisciplinary work, like choreography, dance, art, it all merges together here very extremely. Like not that much in Europe. It's pretty separated, and here it's more oneness into every. So it was funny because when I did the first show, a person who wrote about my work in, I think it was Art Forum article, this person entered the space, and the first question she asked to the gallerist was, is she a dancer?
Oh.
And like when the gallerist told me this, I was like, whoa, what did you answer? And this is when the secret came out. Like basically this person could feel that there was some other kind of like knowledge behind the work. You know, it's not just like an art piece, it's something sensitively different towards feeling of the space. And it's, she said like she felt she was like guided through, like you actually asked me the question, are you thinking how you're guiding the viewer? And no, I'm not. Like I'm actually thinking to create the like object that has certain kind of message, and the message kind of brings certain kind of choreography itself. So it's kind of a subconscious process.
You know, so it just strikes me in what you're talking to, and also the imagery on the Delaware Contemporary's building. You know, movement is a very powerful metaphor today, right? And, you know, you spoke about kind of movement in the studio and the generative activity that it goes on there, the how even making the artwork is in itself an artwork. So, you know, there's all this creation that happens inside, I'll call it the bubble very intentionally, of the studio. But also there is this feeling of constraint because one can't move freely right now in our world. You know, and I think of the imagery as it relates to the building in Wilmington. You know, it's sort of suspended in this in-between state, which is how we are all kind of suspended right now. And, you know, I have this dream that's inspired by your work of my own house, which feels very safe and protected, sort of all of a sudden growing limbs and like taking me in my safe bubble to all the places that I miss seeing, right? And then there's this other level, of course, that like when we look at the contemporary and we see the implication of movement on an institution of art and culture. I mean, there are broader questions, obviously, going on about how institutions need to change. They need to move forward. They need to sort of address their histories and then figure out a path to make the histories ahead of them more inclusive and constructive and positive. And I think we all look forward to seeing what comes next, and are really grateful to have the banners up right now to think about, and really, I mean, just to catalyze a different way of engaging with the space around the Delaware Contemporary. So thank you so much, Anna, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna and Kristen, both so much. This has been so insightful, and we really appreciate the opportunity to connect and hear more about your work. And it does seem like there are so many exciting and relevant things coming our way from you, Anna. So we'll be excited to stay tuned, and we're just so thankful for talking today and the opportunity to show your work at the museum. So we hope we get to see you here at the museum soon, along with some of our visitors at some point.